Get her off my bridge. Now, we're in the middle of a war game, not a school tour. The crowd of tense officers in the Combat Information Center flinched at Commander Wilkes's sharp command, a few offering nervous smirks. The woman in the simple lieutenant's uniform didn't react. She showed no anger, no embarrassment, no sign she had even heard the insult that echoed in the sudden, sharp silence. She simply stood, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on a secondary terminal that glowed with cascading lines of raw data. But when the Admiral, observing from the elevated command chair, saw the way her hands rested near the console, not on it, but near it, like a concert pianist waiting for a silent cue, he leaned forward, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his eyes. If you believe that true authority is proven not by the volume of the voice, but by the weight of one's actions, type competence below. The air in the CIC crackled with manufactured tension, a symphony of beeps and clipped radio calls that simulated the opening moments of a peer-level naval conflict. This was CENTCOM's largest joint service exercise in a decade, a digital battlefield where careers were made and broken. Commander Wilkes, the ship's tactical action officer, stalked the floor like a caged predator. He was a man carved from institutional arrogance, his voice a permanent loudspeaker of self-importance. His eyes landed again on the young lieutenant, an unfamiliar face in his meticulously controlled domain. Her name was Rostova, and she had been assigned to his watch by Fleet Command with no explanation other than specialist observer. To Wilkes, she looked like a librarian, her features sharp and intelligent, but utterly devoid of the weathered grit he associated with a real naval officer. He saw weakness. He saw a box ticker. He saw someone who didn't belong in the heart of his warship, and his prejudice was a weapon he wielded with casual cruelty. He shoved her, not with immense force, but with a dismissive, patronizing push away from the tactical plot. Go find the coffee mess, Lieutenant. Let the real sailors handle this. Again, she said nothing. She simply stepped back, her calm a mirror reflecting his own agitation, an unnerving silence that was more powerful than any retort. The exercise escalated. On the main holographic display, a swarm of red icons bloomed on the horizon, a simulated saturation attack. Vampire, 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 a sensor operator shouted, his voice tight with practiced urgency. Multiple inbound missile signatures, bearing 090. Mach 3+. Terminal phase in 90 seconds, Wilkes barked orders, his voice a confident roar as the ship's automated Aegis combat system began to engage, spitting virtual interceptors into the sky. Blue icons met red, and red icons vanished. It was a textbook engagement, precise and deadly. Wilkes allowed himself a smug glance toward the Admiral, and then toward Rostova, who stood silently by the bulkhead, an irrelevant ghost in his grand machine. Then, the unthinkable happened. A single line of text flashed across every screen, stark and terrifying / network anomaly detected. Aegis offline //. A cascade of system failures followed. The confident roar of the CIC died, replaced by a panicked, suffocating silence. The remaining red icons, a second wave they hadn't seen, continued their inexorable advance. They were a dead-stick landing, a ghost ship waiting for impact. Wilkes froze, his face a mask of disbelief. His commands became frantic, desperate pleas to systems that no longer listened. Reboot fire control. Get me a solution. Somebody do something, he yelled, his authority crumbling into raw fear. The bridge crew worked with frantic but useless energy, their fingers flying over keyboards that were now just plastic. The ship was blind, its sword broken, its shield shattered. The Admiral's face was grim stone. He knew what this meant. In a real-world scenario, they would all be gone in less than a minute. Amid the rising tide of panic, a single point of calm remained. Lieutenant Rostova. She moved with an eerie, unhurried grace, stepping back to the secondary console she had been observing. Her movement was so deliberate, so devoid of the surrounding chaos, that it drew every eye in the room. She ignored the primary tactical displays, the screens that screamed of their impending doom. Her focus was absolute, centered on the simple, text-based interface of the auxiliary terminal. Her fingers, long and steady, began to move. It wasn't typing, It was a fluid, rhythmic dance, a language spoken not with voice, but with code. The air grew thick with the unspoken question, what was she doing? She wasn't trying to reboot the Aegis system. She wasn't running diagnostics. She was inputting a manual override command, a string of alphanumeric characters so long and complex it looked less like a password and more like a genetic sequence. It was a language no one else in the CIC understood. Commander Wilkes, his face pale and slick with sweat, finally found his voice, a ragged whisper of disbelief. What is that? What are you doing? That's not a standard protocol. Lieutenant Rostova didn't look at him. She didn't pause. Her fingers continued their silent, relentless cadence. She was a surgeon performing an impossible operation, her concentration a force field against the impending digital apocalypse. The final character was entered. She pressed a single key. Execute. For a heart-stopping second. Nothing happened. The red icons were closer, filling the screen. Then, from deep within the hull of the carrier, came a profound, resonant thud. A sound of immense power, held in reserve, finally unleashed. A sound of salvation. On the main display, the ship's vertical launch system cells, previously grayed out and unresponsive, flashed to life. A perfect, coordinated salvo of interceptor missiles erupted from the deck, not in a panic-fire sequence, but in a meticulously calculated, elegant wave. Each missile tracked, each missile found its target. The screen became a silent firework display of blue icons annihilating red. The final incoming threat vanished just seconds from simulated impact. And then, there was a silence more deafening than any explosion. A stillness born of shock and profound, undeniable awe. The entire CIC crew, from the lowest-ranked sailor to Commander Wilkes, stared at the clear tactical plot, then at the small, quiet lieutenant who stood calmly before her terminal. The system status on her screen read in simple, green text, / Bastion protocol active. Threats neutralized / Wilkes's mouth hung open. His arrogance, his certainty, his entire worldview had been shattered in less than 30 seconds. His mind couldn't process it. That's not possible, he stammered, the words hollow. That protocol is a myth. It's a DARPA ghost story. The Admiral descended from his command chair, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the deck plating. He didn't look at the tactical display. He didn't look at Wilkes. He walked directly to Lieutenant Rostova. He stood behind her, peering at the simple green text on her screen for a long moment. He saw the code, the inhuman precision of its execution, and he understood everything. He turned slowly to face the rest of the bridge. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, cutting through the stunned silence. Commander Wilkes, he began, his gaze like iron. For the last 2 years, this officer's name has been classified above top secret. Her duty station wasn't a ship. It was a secure server farm deep in the Nevada desert. She wasn't observing our systems, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. She was auditing them. Because she is the one who wrote them, he gestured to the screen. The Aegis Bastion protocol isn't a myth. It is a closed-loop, emergency defense system she personally designed as its lead architect at DARPA. It bypasses the entire ship's network and can only be activated by a dynamic, one-time authorization code. A code that only she knows. He then turned back to Rostova, his posture shifting from that of a commander to one of profound respect. He drew himself to full height and delivered a sharp, perfect salute. Lieutenant Rostova, my apologies for my officer's conduct. Your bridge, ma'am. The story of what happened in the CIC that day spread through the carrier strike group, not like wildfire, but like a change in the tide, slow, powerful, and irreversible. It wasn't loud gossip shouted in the mess halls. It was a quiet, shared understanding communicated in nods and knowing glances. The legend of the ghost coder was born. Sailors would point to the auxiliary console and call it the Rostova terminal. The tale became a parable, a stark reminder that the most critical components of the machine are not always the loudest or the most visible. Commander Wilkes was a changed man. His booming voice was gone, replaced by a more measured, thoughtful tone. He was seen in the ship's library, poring over technical manuals, his old arrogance replaced by a new, humbling hunger for genuine knowledge. He approached Lieutenant Rostova a week later, not in public, but in a quiet corridor. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice stripped of all its former bluster. I was wrong. My assumptions were unprofessional. I apologize, Rostova simply nodded. Understood, Commander. For her, the event wasn't about vindication. It was about competence. The system had worked. That was all that mattered. Years passed. The Rostova Protocol was declassified and became a cornerstone of naval defensive doctrine. At the Naval War College, new tactical action officers were not just taught about its function, they were taught the story of its first use. A framed photo was hung on the wall of the simulator room, a grainy, unofficial shot of a young, unassuming lieutenant standing calmly at a console while the holographic display behind her showed a wall of incoming fire. The instructors used it to teach the most important lesson of all, that leadership and power are not defined by rank insignia or a commanding voice, but by the quiet, demonstrated competence to act decisively when all else fails. They taught that arrogance is a liability and that assumptions are the most dangerous enemy you will ever face on the battlefield. The true warrior, they explained, doesn't need to announce their presence. Their skill speaks for itself, a silent testament to a legacy built on discipline, precision, and a profound respect for the mission over the ego. The legacy of that day was not about the humiliation of one man, but the elevation of an idea. It became a living part of the Navy's culture, a story passed down to remind every sailor, from the Admiral to the newest recruit, that the person standing next to them might be the one who holds the key. It was a testament to the fact that true strength is often veiled in silence, and that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a calm mind under pressure. Lieutenant Rostova never spoke of the incident again. She didn't have to. Her work, her code, her actions had spoken for her, creating a ripple effect that strengthened the very institution she served. Her triumph wasn't loud or boastful. It was coded into the mainframe of the fleet itself, a permanent legacy of quiet, unshakable competence that would save countless lives long after her name was forgotten. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent discipline defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.